Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for my LCK Cup 2026 week number 1 overview and analysis video. We are back here in the LCK. We, of course, posted our first weekly recap of 2026 yesterday for the LPL's week number 1 for their split number 1, so excited to get back into the groove of the LCK here on Tuesday as well. If you guys are excited for all of the action that happened at the beginning of the LCK year, let me know down in the comments section below. Always curious to know where you guys landed on some of these, games, some of these players, just how everything ended up breaking down. Of course, I highly recommend you check out the LCK primer video that I did for the LCK Cup. That is, of course, me power ranking every single team and every single player in the entire region. So it's a big breakdown of all 10 teams and basically what my expectations and what my thoughts were on them before we went into the year. If you were curious on maybe what my thoughts were, definitely check that out. If you have already checked it out, or if maybe you just want to see how I react to the games that we already got, then this is the video for you. Very excited to get into it. Like I said, let me know down in the comments what you kind of felt coming out of week number 1. What team surprised you both in a good and a bad way? We certainly got some upsets in week number 1 that I am very excited to talk about. So let's get into it. If you are new here, what we are going to do is go series by series, talking about the advantages and disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each series that we cover. At the end of the video, I will be giving a player of the week and a dud of the week to tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. Very excited to finally get back into talking about some games here on this channel. Small plug, not going to throw up a graphic or anything for it, but I am still casting for LPL English. Links to that are in the description, the YouTube and the Twitch. I casted a couple of days ago here on the not the NIP, the WE versus Thunder Talk series, and the NIP WE series I will be covering this upcoming weekend. So definitely check out LPL English if you want to see me live, or just check it out in general because the product and the broadcast has been great so far at the beginning of the year. But with that plug out of the way, let's get into the content itself, and that means starting off with day number 1. Even in the LCK Cup, we still get the standard 2 best of 3s per day, 5 days a week, so 10 best of 3s to cover. As a reminder of what the format is, there are 2 groups here, Group Baron and Group Elder. Every single team in one group will play all 5 teams in the other group, and then one group will have more wins than the other. That's how they seed playoffs, but generally speaking, just remember that if you are in Group Baron, your regular season is you playing 5 best of 3s against the 5 teams in Group Elder. So that means we kick it off with kind of an interesting matchup here. It's the surprise team from 2025 in the LCK and KT Rolster taking on a team that kind of inherited parts of their roster in DN SOOPers, and of course, the new named team in the LCK. And as expected, KT is going to be able to pick up the 2-1 series win, but this was not easy. This was not a dominant win for KT. You would hope that kicking off the LCK year would be a good sign for KT Rolster, that them being able to jump out to a victory would be kind of, oh, it's exciting. DNS is an improved team from what they were last year, but honestly, KT didn't look all that great in this series. They once again had to get bailed out by BDD in the mid lane, and you know what? This might just kind of be a similar team to what they were last year, maybe a slightly worse version, which is unfortunately what we were talking about for DNS on the other side. Of course, there's some pluses and minuses to how they played. I think their top side was actually pretty good. Their solo laners in particular, I think, performed really well in this series. They just had nothing going on the bottom side of the map, mostly because the proposed roster that we thought they were going to start the year with is not the one they're actually playing with here. Peter is once again not on the starting lines for an LCK team, this time for the DN SOOPers. Life is still in the starting lineup, of course, somebody who does have experience playing with Doctum as of, FPX in the LPL, and so they probably wanted to give that a chance, but we're going to talk about this. If Peter continues to not be in the LCK, I'm just going to lose my mind because they probably win this series if he is in. That is how much of a difference that guy probably makes on this series overall. But for KT, they really utilize that 6-man roster that they are talking about to pick up the victory here. Polu plays game number 1 in the support position, the game that they end up losing. He plays, I would say, fine, generally speaking, on the Alistar. He's not necessarily good or bad, but they put Ghost in for games 2 and 3, and those are the 2 that they pick up wins in. Ghost looked excellent in game number 3 on the Thresh, and that is a really exciting thing. But like I said earlier, there is one player that you have to just point out for KT Rolster. It continues to be BDD. Not that that should surprise anybody. He's one of the best players in the world, and he's still stuck on this team. When you look at the way that, Jungle ended up playing, Cuz had some good moments in this series, but Pioshik was actually really pressuring him out, I would say, in the early game blame for a majority of how this ended up going, really with the exception of game number 2, which was just a complete stomp. Like games 1 and 3, I think Pioshik did a great job of being able to push his advantage. Dudu was generating leads for himself on the top side. You know, we'll talk about him in just a little bit. Like DNS was really putting up a fight, and BDD once again just kind of had to carry the team across the finish line on his signature Zoe pick in game number 3. This is how KT's probably going to look for a majority of this year. They're going to be able to win some games, win some series, but it's not going to look pretty, and they're going to have to rely on their superstar in the mid lane. I wish I could say more about this, but this is exactly what we saw in 2025 for the most part from this team, especially before Peter came in to the support position when, you know, things I think got a lot more stable for how KT was able to win because Peter was much more active as a playmaker, playing things like Rakan and Nico across the map. This is much more of an example of what they looked like, I think, towards the end of the spring split when they started to find their footing, but weren't exactly dominant in the way that maybe you would have wanted in like the summer split just yet. BDD was the one hard carrying them across the finish line on the Rise, on Zoe or Talia, these champions that just have so much map presence that if he is able to generate a lead and, you know, be able to skirmish a lot, he can be the best player on the Rift, I would imagine. Like I said, we are going to get something similar here. I do want to give some credit to Perfect on the top side. Dudu had a great series, and I think he played phenomenally. Probably was the better top laner in this series, but Perfect, I think, was still, you know, solid in his own right. He wasn't giving over free resources, even if he was losing early on in the 1v1. Really, with the exception of game number 2, I think Perfect's laning still needs to get a bit better. We talked about that in the primer video, but I think his team fighting was solid enough here. Cuz was good in game number 2 on the Sylas, which is a good look, but it's also one of those things where, like, game number 2 was just so out of control for KT that it's really hard to get a real bearing on who played well and who did not. I think he needed to be a bit more aggressive in some of the early parts of this series, especially in game number 1 on the Malphite, but overall, I'm not worried about Cuz being able to go back into the aggressive territory. I think, you know, fortunately for him, being too passive is something that I just do not think is going to stick. That's not his playstyle. Aiming looked fine in his debut, or his re-debut, I guess, here for KT Rolster, going up against the former KT AD carry on the other side in Ductum. He had some moments where he was super out of position, and he really is just not an aggressive player. He's not somebody who's going to elevate what KT do. We know that for sure, but Ghost actually came in, and their bot lane 2v2 was much better the moment Ghost came in. Their early game in game number 3 on Aphelios Thresh, which is not supposed to be particularly good, was tremendously solid, but I give a lot of that credit to Ghost. I think Ghost was probably the second best player on the Rift here today for KT Rolster, and if that's going to be able to last, especially when he's doing it on things like Thresh, like these playmakers that can really move around the map and generate resources. Like, he was up a ton of gold and a ton of levels onto Life, and that has, you know, partial things to do with Life. Like, Life was just not very good in this series, but I think the big support gap in game number 3 was really what got them over the finish line. So Ghost looks intriguing, BDD looks as good as advertised, and I think, you know, Cuz and Perfect are going to be just fine. Aiming. KT looked exactly as anticipated here, but that could be both good and bad for KT fans. And then for DNS on the other side, this is a really, really frustrating loss because this is everything you did not want to see. Again, I really don't want to like hammer the point home too much, but like Life being in here is just ridiculous. He's done of the series. He was awful in the back end here. Games 2 and 3, he got completely outplayed. He was the biggest problem by far in game number 3 on the Rel. This guy was like 1.5 items at 25 minutes into the game. It was completely unacceptable from him. He never really found a good engage on that champion, and I hate to say it, but like if he is the starting support, then all of a sudden take that number 8 ranking that I had for DNS and drop them closer to number 9 or number 10. Like, it really is that big of a difference. Peter, to me, is the best player on this team, and if he's not getting the chance to actually play, if he is for some reason or another once again sidelined because no team actually wants to consistently start this guy, then this team is going to be worse off for it. The Soraka did not work in game number 2. I think that there is room for more enchanters in this meta than maybe there have been in the past. We've seen things like Lulu and Nami and Renata doing very well over in the LPL. I would imagine something similar could happen here in the LCK, and we'll talk about that a bit more as we go throughout the week, but Soraka was not it in game number 2 for Life either. They weren't able to generate that 2v2 pressure that you draft those enchanters for, and Doctum really suffered for it. He could not play the game. I think part of it was him, like he wasn't playing perfect or anything like that. Like the game 3 lane needed to be a lot more aggressive, and Doctum was just behind on the Ziggs, but I'm not blaming him entirely. His support completely griefed him throughout this series, and we've seen that before for Doctum with Wei last year, that he can look pretty bad when his support is not in a good spot. So need to see something change here on the bot side, because Life is just not the player you want starting here, and he will make this team worse. That being said, the top side actually was good. Games 1 and 3 were competitive, and a lot of that was Dudu playing really well. I actually think he was one of the best performing members of either team in this series. He looked fantastic on the top side. This is a player that I've had in my top 3 top laners before in the LCK, which feels feels insane to say because he's kind of been on a downward trajectory, but he has the talent to be one of the better top laners in the league. I think Pyosik and Closer looked like they had good chemistry. Closer played well, even though he was going in to BDD, which I think is a really good sign. Like, there are some really big positive traits for DNS if Closer can play like this, which is a lot closer to what he was last year as opposed to the rest of his career. And if Dudu can get back on track, you have a good solo lane duo, and then perhaps the bot lane can get online, especially if Peter can come in here. But DNS worries me. It feels like this organization is addicted to making bad decisions. Like, it's insane how they are given, good opportunities and they continue to throw them away. Want to see something different, obviously, later in the week than what this was, because they probably should have won this series. And for KT, they probably should have lost this series, but they have BDD and Ghost played really well, so they end up being able to make it work. This team needs a lot of cleaning up to do. Top 4 might have been a bit ambitious for where KT is at right now. They might be closer to 5th or something like that with that kind of performance, but BDD is so good that it might not even really matter. But that's going to bring us to our second series of day number 1, and it's a classic rivalry, I guess technically, here in the LCK. It's Dplus KIA taking on BRION, and DK is going to pick up the win. There is no big upset here. Bro almost always is able to go toe-to-toe and be competitive with DK or Damwon or whatever the organization has been called for as long as I can remember. Bro has been upsetting Damwon, but unfortunately here for Bro, they got absolutely trounced. We go from a series that was very competitive, where it really felt like both teams could win at any given moment, to a series where it was over like second number 1. I think that is the best way I can put it. There was no instance in this series where it ever felt even remotely like Bro had a chance. DK was out for blood, and honestly, I'm still super excited about this team. I said it in the primer, but this is the team I am the most excited about in the entirety of the LCK with the way that they are built, and you know what? It very much paid off here in series number 1. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the series for me, come on, man, it's Showmaker. This was one of the bigger mid lane destructions that you will ever see in your entire life. This was personal. Like, I don't know, does Showmaker have something on Roamer? Does he just want to prove that he's still one of the best mid laners and players in general in the world? Because this was a statement series from Showmaker to kick off the year. He looked like he was, just ready to destroy anyone. I think he could have gone up against Chovy in this series and completely gapped. That's how locked in it really felt like he was on the rise, on the LeBlanc. He was dominating Roamer in the 1v1, and we'll talk about it in a second. Roamer is in here as the starting mid laner. There are some mixed opinions on this, it seems, from the community. I think that there are pluses and minuses for this for Bro, from my perspective, but Showmaker certainly showing a lot of the minuses right now because he dominates him in the 1v1. The mechanics are not enough from Roamer to be able to survive. And then, what does he do? Well, he's playing, Ryze and LeBlanc, so he just goes and terrorizes Gideon, he goes and terrorizes Namgung, and the game is over. Like, Showmaker is just 1v9, completely destroying the map. We talked about BDD in the previous series, just completely hard carrying. Showmaker did that and then some in this series, and that's with the fact that I think the rest of the team played really well. They played much better than KT did. It was just, that's how dominant Showmaker's effect on the map was. He was everywhere that he needed to be, and he did it by dominating his own individual matchup. I do want to give a lot of credit to Lucid, who I think had a great series here, going into a player in Gideon that, I'm going to be straightforward, I think Gideon was better than Lucid for large portions of last year. I think, obviously, people are going to be pretty biased towards the summer split, where Gideon kind of got destroyed towards the end of the year because Nongshim was just in a disastrous spot. They were losing every single series, but up until then, when everybody was playing the same schedule, Gideon was better than Lucid for a lot of last year, so for Lucid to come out at the start of the year, look really good on the Jarvan, on the Pantheon, it's a really nice sign. Lucid and Showmaker were obviously unbelievably dynamic in the winter split in the LCK Cup last year. That was the time where they really peaked as a duo. Hopefully that's not the case here, because if you can get performances like this more regularly out of this team, I mean, that's what we've been waiting on. Lucid and Showmaker are the core of what Dplus KIA want to be, and we saw it here in this series that it can very much work. Smash and Career as a debuting bot lane duo looked fantastic. Career Omega gapped Namgung in this series. Teddy never really even got to play the game on things like Jhin in game number 2. Smash was really far ahead, didn't really have to create for himself because Showmaker, Lucid, and Career were so active on the map, but it's not his fault, right? Like, he was playing Ezreal and Sivir, and he looked great in those two roles. People pointed out in the comment section when I was talking about Smash that maybe I was underestimating his Ezreal and the way that he's played that in Tier 2. Maybe that is the case. I saw some games, and they were fine. He didn't look quite as dominant on those as he did on some of the hyper carries that he is known for, and I know people are like, oh, he grew a lot last year. I'm still a wait-and-see kind of guy in terms of how that's that's going to translate itself to the LCK, but it certainly worked here in series number 1, and she wouldn't even really have to play the game. So, DK looked really, really solid. Showmaker just looked like he was on a warpath in this one, and that is a very easy pathway to success for this team. For Bro on the other side, like I said, Roamer is the obvious choice for dead of the series here. I mean, this was a nightmare LCK debut performance for Roamer. I think that there are some, like I said, mixed opinions on this guy in the community. Most of them seem to be a little more negative, although I think that's decently reactionary from this series. I don't think most people would tell you that this was a terrible move before this series ended up working out. In fact, I said in my primer I would much rather see Roamer here than Fisher, even if both of them have not necessarily proven a lot in recent years. Roamer at the very least has the mechanical upside to be a bit better. I think Fisher is just not a good mid laner. The thing with Roamer that I think people are revisionist historying, if you will, or I guess recency biasing, however you want to put it, is he was really good in the Challengers League in that final year. He reminded me a lot of how Poby played towards the end of his time on T1 Challengers, where it just felt like something clicked in his head that last year for Hanwha Life Challengers. He goes over to North America, goes to the NACL, and honestly is decently good in Tier 2. You maybe would have expected a bit more from like a superstar prospect like that. You see players like Quid dominating in Tier 1 right now over in North America, but Roamer never really gets that chance. He goes to the LTA South last year and is fine. Generally speaking, I think he has good tape, but not necessarily a good team around him. Like, there is something here that I think you can pull out, but this guy has kind of been on a downward trajectory over the past 2 years, and that is encapsulated by how he played here. The Orianna in Game 2 was awful. I mean, this is truly one of the worst mid lane games you will see if he continues to play like that. Maybe you do even go to Fisher because it really was that bad. Already talked about it a bit, but Namgung also looked lost. Another promotion here from Tier 2, making his Tier 1 debut. The Elise in Game 2, also not it, but the Nico in Game 1, pretty bad. Like, Namgung looked as bad as I thought he would. I ranked him as my last ranked support coming into this year, not because I don't think he has upside, but because it was basically impossible to try and understand what he is as a player. I talked about this with the Gen.G Challengers team. All he really had to do for that team was enable his AD carry, was get about a lot of gold. They basically only played for him as an ADC, and Namgung really does not have an expanded skill set because of that. When he was asked to be more of a playmaker like the Nico or the Elise in this game, he just wasn't very adept at doing so. Career was much more active on the map, and it is a clear difference which is the better promotion to Tier 1 versus Career and Namgung right now in the support position. Gideon had a lot of trouble. Casting was completely useless. Teddy couldn't really play the game, like I said, on the Jhin. This was just bad from Bro. They have to be better in the second series because this was as nightmarish of a debut into 2026 as you could probably ask for. But once again, it looks like Dplus KIA are going to be monsters in the LCK Cup. Really, the only hope at this point is that they're able to keep it up. But if Showmaker is going to play like this and just play with this kind of fire and determination to prove that he's still one of the best players in the world, I don't think it's going to be very hard for them to stay competitive. But then moving on now to day number 2, and we go from one blowout to another blowout, this time much more expected. It's Gen.G making their 2026 debut against DRX, and yeah, Gen.G completely dominate and destroy them. Like, this is the best team in the league versus the worst team in the league in terms of my power rankings. There's no real surprise that Gen.G comes out here and gets the 2-0 in such dominant fashion. Both games sub 30 minutes. This was not close. This was as destructive as you could possibly ask for, and honestly, there's really not a lot to take away from this series in terms of actual analysis. One of the main things is that Vincenzo is not in the starting lineup right now. Again, it is Willer actually starting in the jungle position. This is something that I think will make them better day number 1. Not that it matters against Gen.G, right? Like, that is much more, that's much more relevant when they start playing teams that are closer to their skill level, because they aren't going to win this series basically no matter what, or even stay competitive in this series basically no matter what. But it certainly is something to keep in mind. But Gen.G were just ready to come out on day number 1 and prove that they are exactly who they say they are and exactly who they were last year. There's a reason that this is the number 1 team in the LCK and that they dominated the way they did in 2026 domestically. So I guess we can talk about it. This is going to be a relatively quick overview because really there's no game to discuss. This was over from moment number 1. Ruler gets super fed. Duro looks incredible. Chovy has some really nice moments in terms of being able to play make in the mid game, and then basically from 10 to 11 minutes in both of these games, there's just no way back in for DRX. So there's not a lot to actually analyze. Ruler for me is player of the series. I mean, he's still young. I don't know if you know that. He's going for that rookie of the year or whatever jokes are being made online right now. Ruler looks as good as he's ever looked in this series, and that shouldn't really surprise anybody. It's not like Ruler was bad last year. In fact, I was even a little bit lower in terms of what he actually was in the LCK. I think I had him closer to being like a top 6 or 7 player in the world, whereas a lot of people had him top 2 or top 3. So you know, that's totally fine for me. Certainly not going to complain for what I consider to be the best AD carry of all time stepping up and looking this good in series number 1. But honestly, if you want to give player of the series to Duro, I think that's also fair. I feel really bad for Duro because I feel like I say this all the time on the channel where it's like, well, if you wanted to give player of the series to Duro, I think you totally could, but I'm giving it to Ruler, or I'm giving it to Chovy or Canyon or Keen or whatever, right? Like somebody else almost always gets it. But Duro omega gapped Ondel in this series. I think the biggest gap between these two teams was almost certainly the support position. Ruler was the one who benefited from it, and honestly, he was the one who was making a lot of the plays by the end of a couple of these games, especially game number 2 on the Ezreal, where he looked as good as he's maybe ever looked in terms of a game. But Duro was the one who was getting him there and really setting things up. So you got to give a lot of credit to this bot lane. Nobody's surprised that they're bouncing back day number 1 and looking tremendous even after a bad semifinals performance at the World Championships. But really nice to see that they can do that even against a bot lane like Jiwoo and Ondel. Chovy continues to look excellent. He was really, really good at opening up the map and being proactive. Yucal was not in form in this series. Hopefully he can get back into form again. They're kind of looking for a bit of a rebound with him in the mid lane, and Chovy was not the greatest first opponent to go into to try and get that rebound, but Chovy doing Chovy things and just being one of the best mid-game players in the entire world right now. Keen and Canyon on the top side looked great. Canyon was definitely out-jungling Willer in terms of a lot of the tempo he was creating. Canyon, a player that I am much higher on than consensus. I still cannot believe that people were as low as they were last year, kind of keeping them out of top 20 lists of Worlds, saying he was the reason that Gen.G was struggling. Like, I just don't agree with it. Like, I'm sorry. It's clear that we just have a different opinion on this player, and he once again was able to generate a lot of tempo and keep the game pushing forward. He wasn't the one carrying, but he didn't need to carry in this one with the bot lane playing the way that they were, and Keen is the best top laner in the world. Rich is maybe the worst laning top laner in the LCK, and so it's just not a very good matchup for DRX in general. Gen.G looked dominant. They looked as expected. This is the number 1 team in the league until proven otherwise, and for DRX, this is the number 10 team in the league until proven otherwise. I mean, this looked as bad as it could look for DRX. We already had them with ridiculously low expectations going in to 2026, but nothing looked good for them in this series. Ondel, for me, like I said, is dud of the series. I think the support gap was probably the biggest positional gap between these two teams in this one. Ondel, you know, scarily enough, is often a fast starter and a slow ender. That's kind of always just generally been his arc over the course of a split. If he's starting like this, like 1 in 14 and getting completely omega gapped on Bard in game number 2, then it's cooked. Like, it's not good. You're not looking at a good split for him. He's already a player that I'm decently out on, and this is as bad of a first impression to this year as you could possibly give. Jiwoo as well. I mean, this guy was involved in 5 kills across 2 games. That is nightmarishly bad for an AD carry. The Jhin, once again, looked like it was not really proactive enough to be able to keep up. The Yunara was nothing. There was 0 damage coming through on that champion in game number 1. You drafted something like Kennen with it on the top side, so it was always going to be a difficult proposition to even get to the late game, but, you know, Jiwoo never really got the chance to even show anything off, but the bot lane was just omega gapped, and Yucal as well was also just terrible, absolutely terrible in this series. The Cassio, the Orianna, it just all looked bad. Like, Yucal needs to look better than whatever he looked like in the spring split last year, because that's what got him benched. And unfortunately for him, at the very least, in series number 1, he looked just as bad as he did at his absolute worst in the LCK. The only redeeming quality, I guess, is that he was going into Chovy, and so everybody kind of loses to Chovy. You're not necessarily taking too much away from that kind of matchup when your jungle is super far behind, when your bot lane is getting omega stomped, like your top laner is not doing well in lane. You just have to give him things like Kennen and Sion and hope he can get to the late game. Like, it's just a bad matchup for DRX. You don't want to read too much into it for this team. Maybe they look more competitive when they start playing teams that are closer to their skill level, but Gen.G is not close to anyone's skill level right now. They are so much further ahead with the fact that they retained all 5 members, and I think they're going to continue this massive win streak. They have an easier proposition in their own individual group because they don't even have to play T1, who I think is the other best team in the league right now, and Gen.G's probably not really going to get all that tested until playoffs. Right now, the bot lane looks good. Chovy looks like he's ready to go, and Canyon and Keen did everything they were supposed to on the top side. This is number 1 team in the world type of gameplay, and that's what we were looking to see. Then moving on to our second series of day number 2, and this one was much more interesting in terms of the outcome. It was BNK FearX taking on NS RedForce, and BFX pick up a 2-0 victory here, and they start off their year with a really, really big win. Unfortunately for NS, their new additions did not look good at all, and a lot of the things that we were concerned about for this team heading into 2026 kind of reared their ugly head, but for BFX, the players that capitalized on it are shocking. We'll just say that. I'm not going to sit here and pretend again, like there's no precedent for Vikla coming out here and completely gapping Scout in his first series of the year, but it is certainly a very interesting note to make. Vikla looked fantastic, so much so that he's going to earn my player of the series for their first series of the year. This is awesome. If Vikla is going to show up and actually be a good mid laner for this team this year, things completely change outlook-wise for BNK FearX. One of the things I said in my primer video, and one of the reasons I had them below Nongshim, was I just did not believe in the solo laners. I don't believe in Clear really at all, and that actually really came to fruition here. King and Omega gapped Clear on the top side. This was not close. There was a giant top lane gap in this series. It just doesn't matter. Like, I hate to be the guy who says this, but top lane just does not matter in the game right now. And then, you know, also I would say Vikla was the concern, right? Like, it was one of those things where he had better form at the end of the year, certainly, than anything he showed in the spring split, but generally, Vikla's track record is just not good at a tier 1 level. He was decent in North America, better than I think he got credit for, and then went to the LPL and was, I would say, slightly below average, you know, had some good moments, and again, like, really needed some time to ramp up. Then he comes over here to the LCK and is like the worst player in the entire league for half the year before figuring things out and becoming a below average mid laner, but someone that can survive at this level. I don't know, man. If the Vikla re-breakout, if the KT Rolster rookie year Vikla is coming back here in 2026, things look very, very different for FearX, because Diablo and Kellen continued to be great on the bottom side. They're one of the best bot lanes in the entire league, and Taeyun looked Omega outclassed by Diablo, and Raptor also looked really good, albeit into what I think is the worst jungler in the entire league in Sponge. So, you know, there's some takeaways here, but if Vikla is going to play Ahri and Sylas and these more aggressive picks that he was playing a ton as a rookie and be able to outpace and outclass a lot of the middle tier of mid laners, nobody's asking him to go into Chovy and to go into Faker and to go into BDD and be able to dominate those matchups, right? Like, it's just not going to happen for a player like Vikla, but if he can play against Scout, if he can play against, you know, Closer and be one of the better mid laners in that group, things become so much more for FearX in terms of what their outlook can look like. They can be a top 6, you know, maybe even a top 5 team, depending on what happens with teams like KT Rolster throughout this split. So Vikla looking as good as he did is massive. He completely outplayed Scout. The tempo in lane was ridiculously high. Scout's laning has just gotten terrible. He's maybe the worst mid-game mid laner in the entire world. I don't know what happened to this guy, but this was the case last year as well, where Scout's mid-game was just horrendously bad, and that is carried over clearly, because Vikla's tempo in this one was just completely unmatched by Scout. The way he was able to move around the map and really create for himself was big, but it wasn't just him. I don't want to give all the credit to Vikla. Diablo and Kellen continue to look as good as advertised in the bot lane. Not that that should surprise anybody. This is the one part of the team you felt the most comfortable on going into 2026. Of course, Diablo is an up-and-coming superstar. I don't even know if it's up-and-coming anymore. This guy is like a real superstar at the LCK level. He's somebody who, if one of the top teams picked him up, if a team like KT Rolster had Diablo, if you had BDD and Diablo on the same roster, if it was, you know, BDD, Diablo, and Kellen on KT Rolster, like, that is a potential league-winning type of core that you could have there if everything were to work out. The fact that BFX was able to retain him this offseason when it was clear other teams were actually calling is massive for this organization, and Kellen is just as much a part of this. Lehens was fine, generally speaking, in this series, but Kellen abused Taeyun in lane. Go and watch the 2v2. Diablo was getting a lot of the kills and a lot of the credit, especially down the stretch of these games, but Kellen's 2v2 ability, his ability to really get leads and generate advantages for himself on the bottom side into a weak link, we'll just say, like Taeyun, on the other side, was really clear in this series. So Vikla, Diablo, Kellen all coming through. Raptor had a great series. Clear was not good, but it didn't even really matter. Like I said, and I hate to really push this point home, top lane just does not matter right now in terms of actually being able to consistently win games, and BFX might be the biggest proof of that if they're able to continue to dominate in the way that they did here. For Nongshim on the other side, Scout and Taeyun, the two new players coming back over from the LPL, both looked awful. Scout making his re-debut here into the LCK for the first time ever as an actual starter. The only other times he's ever played in the LCK was as a backup to Faker on SKT back in the day, so finally coming over as a former world champion, and unfortunately, at least in series number 1, that 2025 form has carried over. Like I said, I think people were surprised with just how bad Scout was for JD Gaming last year, despite the fact that that team was so close to making Worlds. If Scout was even remotely up to his own standard, that team probably would have been at the World Championships over Invictus, but he really was a problem, like an albatross for this team, and now you're sitting at a point where he's getting gapped by Vikla in the mid lane here, and that's just bad. His mid games continue to be unapproachable, like completely worst in the entire world caliber. He's okay in other phases of the game. He's still a good team fighter if you can get him there, but boy, is it becoming harder and harder to imagine a world where he gets there, especially now in a meta where not only is early game more important than it's ever been with a lot of the game changes, but especially in the mid lane, shoving and roaming and being able to play play in the mid game. That's the most important part for being a mid laner right now, and it's where Scout is really struggling. So need to see more out of him there. Taeyun also just looks like a terrible addition. I mean, we'll just say it as it is. The fact that this team signed Sponge and Taeyun in the jungle and AD carry roles is just ridiculous to me. Taeyun got boosted up so much because he got to play with Monkey and Vampire last year, who are now doing really well in the LPL. You know, Monkey kind of up for debate, I guess, with his individual performances, but that's besides the point. Not really what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is that Taeyun was the worst player I ever graded out in the history of the LCK when he was playing in this region for the first time, and he looked pretty similar to that here in this series. Sponge was not good. Raptor is certainly a better player, and I think he's going to struggle to have any tempo. You know, Lehens was fine, and King actually genuinely looked great. Like, he looked omega stuck on this Nongshim team. I still believe he's one of the better top laners in the world, like he performed for most of last year, but Nongshim looks like a worse version of what they were in 2026, which is a team that has good players, but is not a good team. They might even be that, except you got rid of the mid laner, or at least benched the mid laner that helped come in and really stabilize you, and you got rid of a jungler that overperformed in Gideon a ton. Even the AD carry in Jiwoo, I think, might have been downgraded here, going to Taeyun. It's really frustrating to watch Nongshim right now. I think this could be one of the worst teams in the league, and for BFX, this is a massive win. This could be a top 5 or 6 team. I mean, that's kind of where they were hovering last year. You're returning all 5 members. The continuity is certainly there, and again, Vikla looked so good in series number 1. If you're getting that kind of performance with already a good jungle and bot lane, BFX actually could be silently kind of scary this year. But then moving on to day number 3, our middle day of the week here, and it's another really, really big blowout. I wish we got some closer series here. It was DN SOOPers taking on Dplus KIA, and DK just looks so dominant right now at the start of the split. There's really not a ton of negative to really give them at all. They're not making bad plays. They're not overextending. They're drafting incredibly well, and they are dominating individually. It's just a great start for DK. I don't want to overreact and sit here and say that I'm buying in again, but I was already super excited on the way that they constructed this team. I think the bot lane has gotten better over the course of the offseason. I just don't want to go down the route that we had last year where they looked like the best team in the world in the LCK Cup. They fold in playoffs and they never are good again. They go all the way down to the Rise group. They're not even in, you know, the Legend group throughout the summer split. So like everything fell apart for them no matter how good they looked in the LCK Cup. But man, I just want to believe that something is a bit different right now with the way that they are playing, with the way that they're drafting, and the way that they are adapting to this new game. For DNS on the other side, you're going to hear a very similar conversation to what you heard in the first series from them, where it's like, man, this bot lane's going to continue to be really bad as long as Life is the starting support. It genuinely feels ridiculous. I'm not going to make like a full comparison, but you know, we're going to make a comparison a little bit later to a team that I covered way back in 2022 on this channel and kind of talk about why I think the situation is actually decently similar to Nongshim that year. But for DK, we'll start with the winning side as we always do. Player of the series for me is going to Lucid in the jungle. God, I hope he can keep this up. This is exactly how he looked in the LCK Cup last year, where he's just dominating early. He's generating so many advantages by playing fast and aggressive and really pushing the tempo quickly, and then team fighting like an absolute monster, because that is his strength as a player. If he can start playing well in the early game, we know he's going to be valuable later on, especially if he's going to be playing things like Mbessa and like Xin Zhao in the jungle. You know he's going to be able to make that work. Pioshik actually did a pretty good job in this series of trying to match him. I think Pioshik was by far the best player on the Rift for DNS, and he's actually played pretty well so far at the start of the split, but Lucid was just better on the Rift, and that was very, very clear in terms of how this game broke down. Showmaker, of course, going deathless on things like Rise and Echo and Shiwu. I think having so much lane pressure on Cassante and Gwen certainly helped a lot of the issue here, but Lucid just had so much agency over the map, and if you're going to be able to dominate like that, if you can macro advantage your way into a spot where you're, you know, 500 gold up from minute number 7 on any enemy jungler, then yeah, the game is going to get a lot easier for DK and for the solo laners, for the bot lane, for everybody to play out from that stage. So we've been waiting for the Lucid breakout. I got a little bit more concerned after the end of last year that it wasn't necessarily going to come, that he was just going to be a good jungler at this level, maybe not a great jungler at this level, but this is great jungler kind of status right now, even if it is against some weaker teams. Like I said, Showmaker still looking excellent. I want to give a lot of credit to the draft in game number 2. They cooked with this draft. This Gwen Echo side lane combo with Xin Zhao to be able to create a ton of pressure in the mid game, and Varus that can push down really easily and really safely in the mid lane. You have a playmaker in the Rakan that can start fights fights if you need to. Echo can be on flanks. So can Gwen if you really want to try and set that up. Like the pressure that this Game 2 draft puts on DNS, especially once you draft things like Syndra on the other side that kind of need to be played front to back. You have a lot of protection with things like Sion and Braum, but you don't have a lot of ways to deal with the side lane pressure. Like DK was cooking. There were the 1-3-1 at the end of game number 2 was about as beautiful as you could ask for. And part of that is Showmaker just playing the early laning phase really well, being better than closer in a lot of instances. But the Echo really helped. That pick in game number 2 was massive, I would say, for DK's success chances and really just allowed them to continue to put a lot of pressure on. Same thing for Shiwu on the top side. You know, I give Shiwu a lot of crap for not being a great laner and for that being something that he kind of needs to improve upon, but I'm a lot higher on him than I think consensus is, and right now he's really paying that off. Dudu actually looked pretty good even in their loss in the first series, as I talked about, probably the best performing player on DNS in series number 1, and Shiwu was much, much better than Dudu in game number 2, or in series number 2 for both of them here. So top side looking great, bot side still doing their own thing. Career had a couple of nice playmaking moments on the Rakan, was really solid on the Lulu. Smash continues to not have to do anything, but once again, it's just a massive support gap in terms of being able to create on the map, and the top side was already winning so hard that DK had a pretty easy pathway to success, and they still look like one of the more dominant teams in the league in the LCK Cup. Again, you just have to hope they can hold on to it, unlike what they did in 2025. For DNS on the other side, there's not a ton to say here other than this is a slightly worse version of whatever version we saw of them in series number 1. This time Dudu and Closer are not playing particularly well. Pyosik, I think, still is doing a lot of really positive things for the team, which is surprising me considering just how terrible he was for them last year, but the bot lane is a problem. Like, it's the easiest way I can possibly say it. Doctum is walking up and getting killed first in fights because his positioning on things like Ashe continues to be bad if he doesn't have a support that he trusts, and I can see why he doesn't trust Life right now. He's once again getting dud of the series. I'm sorry, I just do not understand this. Life has to be some sort of scrim god. They have to be paying him a boatload of money. There has to be something going on here because there is no justification for Life starting on this team over Peter, who just was a major piece on a team that went to the World Finals. That guy is benched right now for DNS. Like, there has to be something going on behind the scenes that I'm just not seeing, that I'm not understanding, because it's completely unjustifiable. Life looked as bad as possible in week number 1. You know, I'm not trying to give away Dud of the Week, but he's certainly going to be a pretty big front runner for Dud of the Week in the entirety of the LCK for week number 1. It really was that bad. This team is going to have trouble being able to compete with anybody, including the bottom teams in the LCK, if the bot lane is going to be performing like this. And I cannot stress enough, Doctum is not a player that is going to look good when his support is bad. He is entirely support dependent as a player. If he has a good support, he can be really valuable and productive to a team, as we saw when he was playing with Kellen for a very long time. But as we saw when he was playing with Wei last year, if this guy doesn't have a support that can survive or generate resources on the bottom side, or at the very least be a playmaker in a lot of these exchanges, he is going to look terrible, and Doctum's team fighting has taken a major step back in the first couple of series here. So the bot lane looks bad. Again, Dudu looked pretty terrible on the top side here. Shiwu is not known for his laning, and Dudu was not particularly locked in, even on one of the Omega picks of the patch in Rumble in game number 1. Pyosik was the only saving grace for DNS, and even then, he was still gapped by Lucid. He just was at the very least trying to keep things going. So DNS do not look good. This looks like one of the worst teams in the LCK once again. And for Dplus KIA, I mean, they're looking as good as humanly possible right now. The only question is, can they keep this up? They did it against Bro and DNS, 2 of the weaker teams in the league. Can they do this against the actual good teams? That remains to be seen. But for now, in their first couple of tests in the LCK Cup, they look as good as you could have ever hoped at the start of the year. But then moving on to our second series of day number 3, and this was the big one here in the middle of the week, the debut for both of these teams. It was Hanwha Life Esports taking on T1. And T1, just like their performance in the Kespa Cup, is going to be able to take this series, and they're going to be able to start their year with a big, big win. This was a fun back-and-forth series, but really T1 was the better team. Both Game 2 and Game 3 were very T1 favored the moment they started to settle in. I think especially on the bottom side of the map, everything really started to click, but the top side just looked great throughout the entire series. You know, Doran had some problems. Well, we'll not pretend like Game number 1 was perfect on the Mbessa, but the Akali in Game 3 was massive. Owner and Keria kind of getting a couple of their signature picks here in the Nocturne and the Bard to be able to close out this series, and Pays gets his first win back in the LCK on T1. For Hanwha Life on the other side, there are some real problems here. I think that is the best way I can possibly put it. I still think this team is in a better spot than people give them credit for. That Game 1 win was really solid, and I think they played well in that game, but Games 2 and 3, they lost a lot of tempo really, really fast, and I think that there were multiple misplays that really ended up taking a lot of the control out of their own hands, and that's not really something you want to see out of one of the better teams in the world. So Let's go ahead and get into it. Player of the series for me is going to Owner, and I don't know if this is a popular opinion. Broadcast gave it to Faker. I think that's fine. To me, this was between Owner and Doran, and I wasn't going to give it to Doran after game number 1, but I mean, that game number 3 on the Akali was just ridiculous. That champion ended up really popping off, and we know Doran has been really big in game number 3s throughout his time in the LCK, but I think that especially came to fruition last year on T1, that first year, where it just felt like every single team fight he was making the most of his resources in game number 3, especially when he would lose early. It was really funny how that ended up happening, but I think Owner was just a tad bit more consistent and just effective across the map throughout this series, so I ended up giving it to him. This really was a team effort. I'm really not trying to take it away from anyone. The only player that I did not consider for player of the series really was Paze, and that's not because he was terrible, just because I think it took him a bit of time to settle in and to start playing perfect, but you know, Doran had the big game 3. Owner, I think, was really consistent. Faker was great and consistent throughout the series. KIA had a couple of big moments as well. He just had to play Lulu in game number 2, so I ended up settling on Owner. And, you know, at this point, Owner is the best jungler in the LCK. I talked about this a bit in the primer. I don't think it's an argument right now, although I think it can be an argument. I think, you know, depending on how Canyon ends up starting the season, obviously he's kind of the main contender, but him just coming out and completely gapping Kanavi in Kanavi's first series in the LCK is massive for, I think, his claim to being that number 1 jungler, because Kanavi is one of the players that I think last year had similar performances to Owner. I had them, I think, back-to-back in my rankings in terms of Worlds going in. I think one was 7 and one was 8, I believe, in the top 20 players at Worlds video, if I'm remembering correctly. So Owner being able to perform this way and Kanavi having such a, we'll say, difficult start to his LCK tenure, I think is a really good look for T1. He does get a signature Nocturne pick, getting to play it with Faker's Orianna, but, you know, Owner was doing this in game number 2 on the Xin Zhao as well. That's, again, why I think he was really the one I sided towards with this player of the series, is because I think he was a tad bit better in game number 2. But again, like I said, you got to give a lot of credit to Doran. He completely outplayed Zeus in game number 3 on the Akali. You know, Rek'Sai's got the uninteractable. Well, Akali does that, but a little bit better and does a little bit more damage. So Doran ended up having a little bit of a lead there. Faker got player of the series on the broadcast. I think most of that just has to do with general vibes. Like, I don't think Faker was the best player on the Rift in this series. I think he was awesome as a supporting piece, and again, he was very consistent. I think even in game number 1, he had a lot of nice moments on the Rise. He was the one keeping them in that game. It just kind of came down to Sylas and Orianna, you know, being really strong and being able to set up the rest of the team. The Xin Zhao Sylas duo in game 2 was big, and then, of course, being able to combo off of Akali and Nocturne and Bard and all of these playmakers in game number 3 was nice. KIA got his Bard in game 3 and looked good, and Paze was fine enough, I would say, in his debut. I don't think he was spectacular. I think there is some room to grow here for him as a player to get a little bit better and to be able to carry a bit more, but he did not need to be the main character even against the player he was replacing in this series in Gumayushi, because the top side was so good. So nice win for T1, very much a team win, a team effort. There was not one player that I think stood out and really carried them in the way that we've talked about with some of the other teams in this video so far. T1 just kind of played well as a unit. And for Hanwha Life on the other side, this was kind of tough to pick like a dud of the series or to talk about where things went wrong. Ironically enough, I think Guma was the only player that wasn't completely selling things. I think Zeka had some good moments as well in the mid lane, especially in game 1 on the Talia, but I came down to dud of the series going between either Zeus or Kanavi. I think both of them really just ended up not having a big impact on the map. I think Kanavi actually made more plays than his KDA would suggest, which is why I ended up giving dud of the series to Zeus. On the top side, I think that guy was just not very good in this series. I think he misplayed in a lot of crucial areas, and I think the mistakes were more standoutish from Zeus. I just think top lane generally doesn't have as big of an impact. Like, Kanavi maybe impacted the game a bit more, if you want to say it like that, because he's the jungler and he's not the top laner. But again, I think Zeus played worse, so I ended up leaning for Zeus. That Rek'Sai game in particular in game 3 was really, really poor from Zeus, a player that I think needs to kind of step up. He wasn't as good towards the back end of 2025 as he was in the middle and really at the start of 2025. I think he was a big reason why they went on to first stand and ended up winning that tournament last year, and he was probably the best top laner in the world through the end of the spring split, even with that team not making MSI. It just was the summer split where things kind of got worse, and it does not look like things have gotten better just yet. It's one series. You don't want to panic. You don't want to freak out. Again, T1 beat them in the Kespa Cup finals as well, so you're not sitting here going like, oh, Hanwha Life should have won this series. This is a matchup that they probably should have lost, but Zeus needs to play better, and Kanavi really needs to settle in. We knew it would take him some time, I think, to get used to playing in the LCK. Very different game style. Kanavi is maybe the best early game jungler of all time, but if T1 and if the LCK in general are known for anything, it's being able to slow the pace of the game down and being able to really play that control style a little more efficiently. Owner was just more clinical with the skirmishes that he was taking on the map, both on Xin Zhao and on Nocturne, and Kanavi really really had trouble reacting to, I think, a lot of the plays on the map. I think once he gets his feet under him, starts to get a little bit more comfortable with the way that the game is played and specifically the way that his laners want to set up in a lot of these instances, I think things are going to get better for him, but it was a bad first look. Delight, I think, struggled here. Like I said, Zeka and Gumayushi, I don't think had some big problems. Guma actually had some really nice team fights in terms of his positioning, had some bad ones as well, but generally I think it was a good series for Guma, a good debut for him on Hanwha Life, but he could not beat his former team. T1 walks out of their first series of the year with a victory over one of their biggest rivals in Hanwha Life, certainly the team that has been taking quite a few of the T1 players like Zeus and Gumayushi over the past couple of years, and I think T1 fans are going to be ecstatic that they were able to carry that Kespa Cup form with that tournament winning form, I guess you could say, over to the regular season. But then moving on now to day number 4, the back end of our week starts here, and it's an interesting matchup between HANJIN, BRION, and BNK FearX. That BFX are going to pick up the 2-1 series win in. Bro definitely look a lot more competitive here than they did against Dplus KIA earlier, but BFX once again are able to walk out on top. They come out of week number 1 2-0, and they look pretty damn good, don't they? This team actually looks like it's pretty complete. They're not exactly perfect. I think that Clear on the top side still looks like he's going to be a negative for this team, and I think Raptor is a little bit flippy, but man, the carries on this team, Diablo and Kellen are looking great as expected, but Vikla is stepping up. This guy is looking fantastic at the start of the year. He looks very comfortable. And he looks poised. He's doing it on multiple different types of champions. He's doing it on Galio. He's doing it on Azir. He's doing it on Orianna. It doesn't really matter what he's picking right now. It does seem to be working. Now, the caveat to that is obviously that he's not exactly played the best mid laners in the world through the beginning of the split, but Vikla's looked really, really good in his small sample size. And for Bro on the other side, I think there is positive stuff to take away from this. I think Gideon was really good in this series. Gideon was better than Raptor, especially in their game 2 win when he was playing the Trundle. I think casting looked pretty solid on the top side. Teddy had some moments, even if he completely sold game number 3, just in general with his positioning and the way that he was playing. Like, I just think he completely played that about as poorly as possible, but they just don't really have the firepower right now in some critical moments to be able to step up. I think the rookies look quite poor. Casting, I think, has had some moments, but Namgung does not look comfortable, and Roamer, I think, also is not looking comfortable at all, and those are things that need to get fixed. But for BFX on the other side, we talked about it, man. Vikla's player of the series again here. This guy looks awesome right now at the start of this split. He's actively gapping other mid laners, and that's not something you could say for him really at any point in his career. Even when he was on KT Rolster, one of the big reasons why he won Rookie of the Split, which I was, I think, 4 at the time. I can't even remember. It's on the channel. I'm sure people can go back and check it out. I don't remember who I gave Rookie of the Split to. Oh, no, I gave it to KL, obviously, and that's turned out to be pretty solid. But one of the reasons Vikla won it was because he was such a good facilitator out of the mid lane. He's not really this, like, super dominant lane player. He's never really been that. Even going to his days on FlyQuest, where I think he was a bit underrated, he was underrated because his lane stats were good, and I think his impact on the map was, better. I especially think in the spring split. Obviously, in summer, everything fell apart for Fly. I'm not trying to talk about that, but when this team was, top 3 in spring split, when he was in North America, he was probably the best mid laner in NA throughout half the year. He just could not keep it up. He was terrible at the end. He goes over to the LPL and is asked to be a lot more. He's asked to be a lot more aggressive, and he just isn't really able to match that. I think getting back into the role here, where he can play things that are a little bit more team focused and can start to move around in the mid lane, especially with the way that the new changes have affected the game and affected the map, Vikla might be a really big beneficiary of the 2026 meta, and we're already starting to see that. I think it really does play into his strengths, and yeah, again, I want to make it clear, he's not exactly played the toughest of competition. Scout was really bad in their first series, and Roamer obviously has not looked good at all so far in the LCK, but Vikla has been a big reason why both of them did not look good. He was able to completely outplay them, so nice to see him getting some confidence back, because he really is an X factor on this team potentially being significantly more competitive than we ever gave them credit for, because Diablo and Kellen are continuing to play as advertised. Like, this is not some one-year wonder thing with these two. They're both phenomenal. Diablo is much better than Teddy, completely outclassed him again in this series, especially in game number 3, where I think it really mattered the most. Teddy's positioning really just came back to bite him. He had no defensive items, and he was constantly getting comboed. You can talk about that just being a Lucian problem, but I always talk about this with Lucian players. You can't just blame the champion for being impatient, right? Like, you have to play a lot more patient when you are playing Lucian. You know that, especially when you're drafting this comp around him, when you're trying to play front to back around 3 tanks. You need to be a lot more patient, and Teddy was not that in this game, and Diablo was just much better in terms of the execution. He is legit. He is everything he was last year, and he's looking great. Same thing for Kellen, although that's significantly less of a surprise because he's been very good for a very long time. I will continue to die on the hill of being a Kellen defender basically for the rest of my days on this channel. Topside did need to be a bit better. I think Raptor at times let this team down. He had a really bad game number 2 on the Xin Zhao where Gideon just completely outplayed him. Not all that surprising. I think Gideon is probably a better player than Raptor, but Raptor needs to kind of start to stabilize so he can be a little bit more of a help to what is a very good bot side right now. And then Clear is just not a good top laner. It doesn't really matter. Again, top lane is just one of those roles that you can kind of ignore in the modern game, at least in terms of, you know, if he's your weak link, you can kind of ignore him. If he's getting demolished in lane, it becomes a bit more of a problem, but Clear being slightly worse than the other top laners they're going to be around in terms of these standings is not really going to kill them. BFX have a really nice core right now, and if Vikla is going to step up, their potential goes up through the roof. And for Bro, unfortunately, they are kind of what I predicted, which is a team that's really going to struggle out of the gate. Namgung has not looked comfortable. I'm giving Dead of the Series to Roamer, but I am not doing so like confidently because Namgung was also just so bad in this series that it really is tough to kind of decide which of these two is kind of hurting the team the most. Unfortunately, Roamer gets both of the Dead of the Series here because he was terrible in the first series, and I think he was a little more impactful in game number 3 in terms of making some massive mistakes and Vikla being able to outplay him, all of that stuff. But I want to make it clear, this is like a duo Dead of the Series to Roamer and Namgung because they have to get better, like both of them, or else this team is not going to be competitive. Roamer does not feel comfortable right now. It doesn't really feel like a lot of his lane dominance that he showed at other levels is going to be able to translate to a league that has very good laners in the mid lane. He's not super proactive. He's kind of selfish in terms of the way that he plays the game. It's just not necessarily working out right now for him. I'm not going to say there's no way that he's able to rebound and get himself back into a better position. I just think that he might be a little cooked and you know, they might need to go in a different direction. This kind of reminds me last year of Nongshim, where they just could not find a mid laner. You know, they ended up promoting Calyx and that kind of worked out for them. But Roamer and Fisher are both bad players, like both bottom 1 type of mid laners in the LCK, and that's just not a good spot for Bro to be in. Namgung, like I said, looks like a bottom 1 support. His engages are terrible. He's constantly in the wrong position. He's not really helping his AD carry in lane. He looks very uncomfortable right now in the LCK. Hopefully he can figure some stuff out. I criticize Teddy. I think it's rightfully so. I think his positioning in game 3 was terrible, and I think it completely sold their ability to win that game in the later part, but he was good in game number 2, and I think he was good at the beginning of game number 3. He just could not quite finish it. Gideon was really solid. I think he was easily the best player on Bro in this series. That Trundle game was massive, and I think he couldn't really do anything in game number 3, and casting was fine enough. I don't think he had like a great or a terrible performance. I think for the most part he was on par or maybe a little better than what we were seeing out of Clear on the other side, but Clear's job was also much easier. So it is what it is with Bro. It just feels like this team is going to continue to be one of the worst teams in the LCK. I still don't know if they're bottom 1. DRX just looks terrible right now, and we'll talk about that a bit more later on in this week, but Bro is obviously a team that I don't think a lot of people are looking at very favorably, especially with this mid and support position right now. For BFX, I think it's the opposite story. This team is climbing up in terms of people's expectations. I was much too low on them, putting them number 7. This is clearly a top 6 bare minimum team in the LCK. They could break their way into top 5 if things ended up really working out for them. I'm really intrigued to see what happens when they start going up against teams like KT Rolster, because I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that they could just be better than teams of that caliber. But for now, if Vikla's going to play like this, you know Diablo and Kellen are going to be good, and for the most part, you're getting good stuff out of Raptor. There is a lot to like about where FearX is at right now, and I think their continuity could really carry into a nice LCK Cup. Then moving on to our second series of day number 4, and a bit of revenge, I think, was properly served in this series as we saw Gen.G taking on KT Rolster, a rematch of the World's semifinals. And unlike the World semifinals, Gen.G came out with a purpose in this one as they demolish KT and get themselves a 2-0 victory. This is more of, I think, what everyone expected. Gen.G clearly were, you know, out for revenge in this one. I hate to kind of simplify it down so much, but these players locked in here today. It's not just the fact that they're really good, it's the fact that I think they definitely wanted to show that they are not the same version of themselves that ended up not being able to do it in a big moment last year. Whether that remains to be the case, you know, I guess remains to be seen. You know, we'll see how the rest of the year ends up playing out for them, but for now, Gen.G look as good as you could possibly hope. They absolutely decimated all 4 of their first 4 games of the split, and no team looked better in week number 1. I can say that with pretty heavy confidence. As for KT, on the other side, this team is kind of bad, and that shouldn't really surprise people who watched them last year. You know, this is a team that made World Finals, but like genuinely there were times in the spring split last year where I was ranking them number 9 in the LCK, like genuine bottom 2 domestically, because they were playing so bad. And I think they got rid of a lot of the things that ended up making them really good. Now, BDD was great over the course of last year. He's still one of the best players in the world, but he's not Chovy, and he got outplayed by Chovy here as he did domestically. And that's a point I want to make pretty clear in this. And we'll talk about that a bit more, you know, as we continue to go along. But this bot lane is like hugely downgraded. Aiming is completely aimless in terms of the way that he plays the game. He's just a complete passenger mentally, and both Ghost and Polu are not playmakers, which means that now all of a sudden Cuz starts to feel a little bit less relevant. Perfect is taking a step back. KT is just not looking all that good out of the gate here. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the series for me is going to Keen on the top side. Broadcast, I think, gave it to Chovy. I understand, man. Chovy's Anivia was monstrous in game number 2, but everybody was kind of monstrous. I think Keen deserved it. I think Duro was definitely in the conversation, again, for kind of deserving player of the series. Canyon, I think, was excellent here. Ruler continues to look great, you know, as he's, you know, continuing to climb the kill leaderboard for all time. Like, Gen.G's just stacked across the board, but the reason I gave it to Keen was it felt like he not only was able to utilize the Omega pick right now on the top side in the Rumble really effectively early on in game number 1, but he was completely untouchable on that Scion in game number 2. Really great laning phase, and he played the end game about as perfectly as you can. I just don't know if I give Keen enough credit. Like, he is definitely far and away the best top laner in the world, and I don't know if I ever really talk about him as such, or at least talk about him enough as such, because, you know, top lane is just a position that does not affect the game nearly as much as a lot of the other roles, so he doesn't really get the credit for player of the series, or, you know, really, like, highly ranking. He was number 10 as the number 1 top laner in my top 20 players at Worlds last year, because top laners just don't have that kind of impact right now. But Keen is far and away the best top laner in the world, and I do want to give him credit for that. He was much better than Perfect in this series, and I think he did everything he was supposed to do. Like, this was basically a perfect series from Keen in terms of the way he played it out. Do want to talk about the Chovy versus BDD thing, because, man, I got some comments on this that just really confused me. Like, BDD outplayed Chovy in the semifinals. I'm certainly not going to argue against that. I said that very vehemently on this channel, that Chovy basically for the first time in his entire career, like, genuinely was bad at, you know, the world semifinals. Like, obviously this is a guy who's not been able to get past that stage for a little while, but most of the time he's at the very least good in those series, just maybe not world class. He's not the one actively letting his team down. Against BDD, it really felt like it was the first time that he was getting outclassed, that he was a reason that his team was losing. But let's not revisionist history things here. Chovy gapped BDD almost every time they played last year outside of that. Like, there were people that were like, how could you possibly put BDD below Chovy when BDD beat Chovy all the time? And I just, like, point to me the series that BDD gapped Chovy in. You can point to 2. You can point to when they beat them in the playoffs, Gen.G's only series lost domestically last year after the winter split, and at Worlds in the semifinals. Those are the only 2 times that happened. The next time, which people forget about, that these 2 teams played against each other in the lower bracket finals in the summer split playoffs after KT had already beaten Gen.G, Chovy was demolishing BDD, and he did so in the regular season regularly as well. I don't like this narrative that for some reason people think that BDD is somehow Chovy's kryptonite. That was not the case. Chovy kind of let himself down in the semifinals, but, you know, BDD is just a good enough player to capitalize. We're not sitting here saying that BDD is gapping Chovy every single time they play, and I think this is a good example of that. Look at game number 2 here on this Anivia. BDD had no chance. This is the worst series that BDD has played in quite a long time, and that's because Chovy locked in here today. I said it earlier, I'll say it again, Canyon was great. He was much better than Cuz. Not that that should surprise anybody. I think Canyon's going to have a pretty big redemption year from a lot of people's perspective, unless people are just kind of ignoring him, which I hope they don't do. Ruler and Duro continue to be unbelievably good. The bot lane gap here was also massive. Let's not forget that as much as Chovy was very bad in pretty key moments in that series, especially early on in the semifinals, that final game that ended up getting KT to finals, like, that was the worst game I've ever seen Ruler play. Like, Ruler needed to be better in the semifinals as well. I think he got a bit of revenge here. Duro continues to be excellent. We'll talk about the support position for KT on the other side here in a second, but Gen.G are just on fire. I mean, it's the best 4 games you could possibly ask for in week number 1 from them, so good to see that from them. And then for KT on the other side, I mean, this is just a team that I think has, like, clear weaknesses. They went on a miracle run in 2025, and everybody knew it was a miracle run. I've been pretty vocal about this. I haven't really gotten any pushback in the comments. I'm curious to see if people agree or disagree with this take. I think KT are the worst Worlds finalists of all time, like, in terms of just what their team composition and just general talent level are. There are other teams that I think you could throw out there in terms of the conversation, but I would take KT over all of them. I know people point out DRX, but first off, DRX actually won Worlds, and You know, that I think is a small difference. And also DRX was much better domestically than KT Rolster were. They were just inconsistent, but their highs were certainly there. KT just didn't really have that throughout a majority of the year. Their lows were so much worse than DRX. And I think the talent level was not comparable on those two teams. You're talking about a bot lane of Deft and Beryl versus a bot lane of Doctum and Peter, right? Like it's not the same kind of thing. And I think KT was always going to crash back down, especially because they got rid of who I considered the second best player on the team last year in Peter. And now in the support position, you've got Ghost and Polu, both of whom are nightmares, both of whom are not looking good. Ghost looked good in that first series against weaker talent. Hopefully he can continue to develop, but Polu looks outclassed. He looks unplayable at this level. He's dud of the series and he only played one game. He only played game number 2, but he was so bad in game number 2 that he kind of stole dud of the series away from Perfect, who was bad, Cuz, even BDD, who I think deserved player of the series or dud of the series for the way he performed here. I think Polu was that bad in game number 2 that even with only half of the series experience here, he is going to get that award. I don't want to see him anymore, man. Ghost needs to play more here. He looks like he has a higher floor, which is insane because he's role swapping to support, but Polu does not look even remotely competent at this level. Aiming looks like he's really far behind in terms of being able to generate resources. He's like if Doctum was incredibly scared, and I think that that's a really bad place for him to be. And like I said before, if BDD is getting outplayed by the enemy mid laner, it's cooked for KT. They're just incapable of winning a series if BDD is not carrying them. So KT looked pretty bad. You know, we talked about BNK FearX actually looking really good at the start of the split. KT is not this like team that's guaranteed top 5, that's guaranteed to get into like upper groups when we start making some separation. Like KT is a team that I think really needs to start locking in if they don't want to be in the conversation with FearX and, you know, teams like teams kind of around that, Nongshim that we'll talk about in just a second. If they don't want to be in that conversation, they need to start playing better because the version of this roster looks a lot closer to that than it does to even like a Dplus KIA or a Hanwha Life right now. And for Gen.G on the other side, come on, man. It's the best team in the world until proven otherwise. I know that, you know, you can talk about the international stuff, but domestically, this team is just completely untouchable. They have been for years and years and years, and there's no real reason to expect that to stop here. They have looked as good through 4 games as maybe anyone in LCK recent memory. But that's going to bring us to our 5th and final day of LCK action here in week number 1 of the LCK Cup. And boy, are we closing out the week with a pretty big upset as we saw Nongshim RedForce take on Hanwha Life Esports. And Nongshim picks up the 2-0 victory. They don't even drop a game. HLE start their year 0-2. And things are looking quite dire for the way that this team is gelling together because it feels like they're just on completely different pages right now with the way that they are playing the game. Their macro is terrible, like genuinely terrible, and it's something that they need to fix. Obviously, their micro needs to get better, but it really does feel like 5 solo queue players just kind of throwing themselves at other teams right now, and even a team like Nongshim that I think has real problems has more than enough talent and cohesion to be able to come together and push themselves above whatever this version of Hanwha Life is that needs to kind of course correct into an actually good team. I don't imagine losing Peanut is this problematic for Hanwha Life's macro. Kanavi has to start locking in, and we'll talk about that a bit more. Player of the series, kind of up for debate here. It should go to one of the solo laners. I think they were the 2 carries of the series. Both Kingen and Scout, I think, were massive towards Nongshim's success, but I'm going for Scout in the mid lane. I think he was a little bit more impactful in both games in general, even if Kingen was probably a bit more stable on the top side. Scout's big plays were massive, and I think he was involved in basically every major thing that Nongshim wanted to do throughout this series, especially coming off of a matchup against BNK FearX, where Vikla really just kind of outplayed him in the mid lane and kind of showcased that he was, you know, a player that really struggled in the mid game. Scout needed a big performance here against HLE, and he very much delivered. This is the best version you could ask for of Scout, somebody that is really stable in the laning phase, can generate small leads against good players like Zeka on the other side, but really make a big impact in the 5v5s at the end of games. I think Nongshim is going to have a much slower game style than maybe a lot of other teams in the LCK this year because they're playing around players like Kingen and Scout and Taeyun that I think are all, you know, really more structured players. They want to play within this identity of a standard game. They don't necessarily want to break things. Now, that doesn't necessarily go into the way that Lehens always likes to play the game, but it's certainly something to keep in mind with them. Scout got to play a little bit more comfortable in this one, got to play a little bit slower, got to play a little bit more of the way that he likes to play him. It really worked out for him. His Talia in game 2 was massive. His Orianna in game 1 was also very, very huge. So credit to Scout. Really nice bounce back. Great series here. And if he's going to be able to keep this up, then things are going to look a lot better for Nongshim. Kingen as well. What a start to the split for Kingen. Zeus has obviously not looked good at all. Out of the gate, he looked bad against T1. I think he really struggled on Rek'Sai in some pivotal moments. And Kingen was just straight up better than him in this series. In lane, out of lane, all of it. Like, Kingen's a great player, a former World Finals MVP, somebody that I think was really good last year until the team just kind of fell off in summer, but this should not be happening to Zeus, right? Kingen, should not be kind of gapping you in terms of the way that this is going down. I just want to give a lot of credit to Kingen. Is it all that crazy to say that he's the second best top laner in the LCK right now? I know Doran is also playing pretty well, but like Doran versus Kingen in terms of who I'd rather have, like I don't think they're all that dissimilar, and Kingen's probably better in lane than Doran is. He's just in great form. He was in great form last year. And it's really cool to see that Kingen is kind of having a bit of a resurgence here, because I think he really was, I don't want to say a bit of a one-year wonder in 2022, but he wasn't all that great before 2022. He was a good player, and then after that, he kind of settled back into just being a good top laner. He's kind of getting back to being a great top laner like he was for, good portions of 2022 when he was an all-pro caliber player. Taeyun and Lehens looked a lot more comfortable. Taeyun just outplayed Gumayusi in this series. I don't know how realistic that is to expect throughout the rest of the year, but Scrim Taeyun has always been hyped up, and we got to see a bit of it here. Lehens was solid enough in terms of the creation. I still think there are times where he's just kind of overextending himself because he's not connected with the rest of the team, but generally Lehens is almost always going to have too many deaths. That's just the way he plays the game. Only negative I can give is that Sponge continues to be a liability in the jungle. If Kanavi had a little bit more macro going on right now, if he was punishing some mistakes a little bit more, Sponge would have had a really bad series, and I think things could have looked a bit different for Nongshim throughout this entire thing, but Sponge really only got punished when he really made egregious errors, and that wasn't quite as often as some of the players on Hanwha Life. So Nongshim, they look okay. I'm not going to sit here and buy into this team. It's just really hard to do that right now, but Scout and Kingen looked better. Kingen looks great. At the start of this year, he looks like one of the best top laners in the world in terms of the way he's played these first couple series, and if you can get players like Scout and Taeyun to be average at this level, then yeah, you can be competitive. But for Hanwha Life, the main story here is just like, we got to figure something out. Like, the macro is not here yet, and I'm going to give them some time. It is the LCK Cup, and, there have been a lot of rumors, and we've talked about this a lot with the LPL, but not every team is taking the winter split all that seriously. Like, I don't want to read too much into the way that teams are playing at the beginning of the year here, because First Stand is just not a tournament that people really care about qualifying for, it would seem. So Hanwha Life being a little bit behind the 8 ball in terms of their communication, I'm not going to sit here and panic. I'm not going to sit here and say that this team is not going to be able to get it together. I think some of their individual plays have actually been fine. Zeka was fine in this series. Like, even going up against Scout, he was staying relatively neutral in some matchups that I don't always think are the easiest to stay neutral in, and he just didn't have the same kind of mid-game pressure that Scout had, because Scout had a better team, right? Like, the team was ahead elsewhere on the map. Kanavi made a ton of errors and was really terrible in Game 2 on the Xin Zhao. Had a lot of moments where I think he really let his team down, but Aatrox's jungle in Game number 1 actually looked really good. Like, he looked very solid in that game, being able to pick up quite a few resources and move around the map. He just has no sense for how to play with the rest of the team right now. His macro is 0. Like, he's not directing this team, clearly. Either that or the communication levels are just super low. He's just kind of playing on his own, and it sometimes works and it sometimes doesn't. Zeus continues to look pretty bad in lane. That's something you have to imagine is going to turn itself around, but it is starting to become a small concern for me. But really, dead of the series, like, the big concern is Gumayusi, who was okay in series number 1. I think he was probably the best performing player against T1. He was awful. He was the worst performing member for me against Nongshim. When you're going into Taeyun, you have to be able to step up and make your mark on the game, and Guma was nowhere on the map here. He was out of position, stepping up way too far, constantly getting caught out on low mobility champions. It just felt like he was mentally, off in this game. Like, I can't even really say it. The series in general, it just felt really bad. He was the worst, I think, across both of these games, even if Kanavi was maybe worse in game number 2. To me, Gumayusi, I think, was kind of the standout in a negative way, and it all just kind of goes back to Hanwha Life feeling completely disconnected right now. I think there is still a good team in here. We see it with some of the flash plays that this team is making. Even when they're not connected, they're still, like, up in kills and relatively in game number 1. They kind of have to throw game number 1 to be in a bad spot. Like, that's the worst version of this team, which I think is fine enough for now, but you need to start seeing this come together at some point. Hopefully it can. But for Nongshim, this is a big win to be able to get themselves into the right spot, and honestly, it's a huge win for their group. Hanwha Life is really kind of the carriers of their group here, and if they're not going to be good, if they're going to be a 0-2 team, all of a sudden the other group with Gen.G and T1 looks like it's blessed and easily going to come out on top. So a big win for Nongshim here, and a really nice look from the solo laners. But that's going to bring us to our final series of the week here, and boy, did we save a good one for last. It was DRX taking on T1, and T1 is going to walk out of here with the victory, but the moral victory absolutely is going to go to DRX, a team that, I and a lot of other people were like, this team's not looking good, their floor is really low, they kind of look like they're going to struggle in terms of the way that these players are playing together. I didn't really see a lot of upside for DRX, like, I just did not expect this team to be competitive, and here they are pushing T1 to the brink, like, genuinely making them struggle in this series. Game 2 was awesome from them. I think they played games 1 and 3 fine. They made a couple of really nice macro adjustments. I think they're probably the team that I've seen take the best advantage of whatever this new coach system is, that they can come in and kind of give some advice, timeout, if you will, in the game. It's insane to see how this works out for DRX, and honestly, I'm really excited to watch this team further. T1 is, again, able to kind of squeak their way to a finish here and to a victory, but I don't think it was clean by any means, and there are some things that I do want to talk about here, but there are still a lot of positives for them. Even if DRX played well, T1 also played well. It's why they were able to walk out of here with a win, and specifically, I do want to give some more credit to Doran on the top side, who I think has started off this split pretty strong in terms of the way he's playing. He's doing exactly what he's supposed to do. I think this is a great matchup for Doran into Rich. This is one of the few players in the league that I don't think will take advantage of the fact that Doran's not exactly the most dominant 1v1 laner in the entire universe. I think that that is something that he can be exploited on, but if you let Doran get into the late game with things like Gwen, he's going to be a pretty big problem on that, especially when he's able to be set up by something like a Renata or a Jarvan engage, and Owner was excellent in this series. He once again got the Nocturne in game number 1, and once again, he looked pretty fantastic on it, but Doran, I think, really was kind of the star in terms of the way he was playing team fights. He got player of the series on the broadcast for a reason. I think this is one of the ones that they genuinely got right. I think Doran, for me, was player of the series. But again, Owner continues to look great, I think, as well for T1. He was probably the best performing member of this team in the first week of the split, and that's a really good sign. You want to see Owner continue to play well. We'll get to Willer on the other side, who looks great for DRX in this series. We'll talk about, what that could potentially mean for them moving forward, but Owner still outplayed him. It wasn't that like Willer was better than Owner. It was more so just that Owner, was good, and so was Willer. So that is a really nice sign. I think Faker continues to be really stable. I wish he would be a tad bit more aggressive, but that's just not who Faker is, especially domestically, especially in the LCK Cup. This guy's not going to, put pedal to the metal and really try to make the most of every single situation. He's going to play within structure and allow the rest of the team to take the risks. And, unfortunately, some of the risks did not pay off, and this is where we can start to get to some of the negatives. Pays was bad in this series. Like, he just did not position himself well. He was constantly under threat, and he never really adapted to it well. Yes, you don't really have a lot of peel and a lot of, safety for some of these picks in the AD carry role, but that Kai'Sa game in game 2 was like genuinely brutal to watch. He was really, really far behind in terms of tempo, and Kai'Sa Nico in general, I think is a bad lane. Like this is, I would never pick this. I think Corki Alistair is one of the few lanes that might not completely destroy it, but like, man, Kai'Sa Nico is just not something that I would have opted into, especially alongside something like Silas Rise in the middle of the map. It just feels like you're not going to do a lot of consistent damage into tanks throughout this game. Like Alistair and Bessa just ended up running the map throughout game number 2, and I don't really think there were a lot of ways to win, and part of that was Paze's problem, part of that was the draft's problem, but generally I think Paze needed to be better in this series, and I think if you're looking for ways that T1 can start to improve and actually start to be a bit more, we'll say consistent, but also just clean in a couple of these series, it's probably the cleaning up of some bot lane play that we saw here. Keria was fine, but again, generally kind of, it was the top side of the map. I would say it's Doran and Owner that continue to look like stars for T1 at the start of the split. For DRX, though, I just want to give them a lot of compliments because they played really well in this series. Jiwoo looked fantastic on the Corki in game number 2, and he looks like he's starting to get back to some of that form we were talking about in 2024, when this guy really felt like he could potentially be a breakout threat in the LCK. Kind of all crumbled away last year when he didn't play well for Nongshim at all in a pretty good situation, but hopefully he can start to get some of that back. He looked really good, like I said, in this series. And I think Willer was the other player who really looked good in this series. Not that that should surprise anybody. Willer's kind of been in jail for quite a long time on FearX, where it just felt like they wanted to go with Raptor. I think Willer and Raptor are very similar players, probably very similar in terms of skill level and in playstyle. So, I'm not going to sit here and say that FearX was entirely wrong for going with Raptor, but Willer is too good of a player to be playing in Tier 2. He's deserved a spot in Tier 1 for a very, very long time. He has been jailed in that organization, if you will, because he should be playing somewhere. And now that he gets the chance, I should say, to play here on DRX, he is making the most of it. I don't want to take a victory lap just yet. It's still very early in the year, and you never really know the direction that an organization is going to head in, but I kind of said, like, man, Willer should be playing here over Vincenzo. Like, I'm lower on Vincenzo, and it looks like DRX might be a bit lower on him as well, because Willer, starting off the split here has more than earned a spot to continue playing for them until proven otherwise. I don't know if Vincenzo is ever going to come in here as the starting jungler. We'll see how that ends up panning out. Still, there are some things that need to be improved upon here. Rich was solid enough in team fights, took away the Gragas, but still is not good enough to dominate laning phase, and especially not good enough to really capitalize on a weaker laner like Doran. I think UCal is not settled in yet. He really didn't have that great of a first week, and that was really something I was looking out for. And Ondel, for me, is going to get dud of the series. It just feels like a lot of his engages are a bit disconnected when he's not on these tanks. When he's playing things like Bard, he really doesn't feel like he's on the same page as the rest of the team. It's why I like him on things like Nautilus and Alistair. I think that that is going to be a sweet spot for where this team ends up landing. But overall, how can you not be impressed with DRX coming out of this series? They played way better than they had any right to, and especially with teams like Bro and DN SOOPers looking so bad in week number 1, I think it's pretty fair to say that this is the kind of performance that gets DRX out of the number 10 spot in the power rankings. And for T1, I'm not panicking on them either. This is a team that almost always plays with their food domestically. They never have a clean series. They never close things out in 2 games. It's just not the way that they operate or play, generally speaking. T1 are always a team that's going to make things a lot more complicated than they need to be, but they came out on top once again, and I think specifically Doran and Owner looking as good as they are at the beginning of the split is a really good sign. Faker as well, I think, had a really good week number 1. So I think both teams, ironically enough, walking out of week number 1, the final series here, feeling pretty good about themselves. All right, but that is going to do it for my LCK Cup week number 1 overview and analysis video. Up on the screen, the updated standings after week number 1. Of course, Group Baron and Group Elder are separated here. It is 5-5 between the groups. That is massive. Remember, winner's group is pretty valuable, not quite as valuable as it was last year, but the 3 teams that auto-qualify for the playoffs without having to go through play-ins are the top 2 teams from the winner's group and the top 1 team from the loser's group. So if you're on the losing group side, you can be like 3-1, or or so not 3-1, 4-1, or 5-0, or even something like that in a really terrible scenario, and not be able to make the playoffs immediately, which just would be terrible. Like, obviously, it's very unlikely that that ends up happening, but it's certainly something to keep in mind. The way it's working out now, the best teams are in Group Baron, Gen.G and T1. The top 2 teams in the world right now are in Group Baron, but Group Elder's bottom is certainly better right now than Group Baron's bottom. So that ends up really working out for both of these groups staying balanced. As for now, we get to talk about my power rankings update after week number 1. You can see what every team is power ranked under the power rank column, and change is going to be how they have changed from last week to this week, so we can go over some risers and fallers. Top 2 are, of course, staying the same. Gen.G and T1 both staying at 1 and 2. They were the 2 best teams in the league this week, and I don't really think I saw anything to really dissuade me from that, but I'm also not making a change at number 3. Hanwha Life is going to stay at number 3 for me, despite going 0 and 2 in the opening week. You guys know I don't like being reactionary. Was Dplus KIA better than HLE this week? Yes, but do I think that Dplus KIA is a better team than Hanwha Life, and do I expect them to be better moving forward? I just don't. Not yet, at least. We need to see a little bit more out of DK, and we need to see a little more bad out of Hanwha Life before I just fully believe that they are going to be a disaster. They've got another loss coming through, probably to Gen.G in this regular season, but they should end things out 2 and 3, and then hopefully they can start making things a little bit better in the play-in stage. It's certainly not an ideal start to this split for them, but I want to give them a bit of time to get things going. Again, not everybody takes Winter all that seriously, and HLE just might be the team this split that's not trying all that much in the LCK Cup. That being said, DK is going to jump up to number 4. I really already wanted to have them at number 4 coming out of my primer video, but didn't have the guts to do so. Definitely pulling the trigger now after what was a fantastic start to the split. KT is going to fall to number 5. They have the chance to fall even lower than this. Honestly, DK and KT do not feel like they're on the same tier of team right now in terms of the way they played in week number 1. I need to see a lot more out of KT, but right now they stay at number 5. 6 and 7 are also going to swap. BNK FearX going to move back up to number 6. Again, probably should have had them at number 6 to begin with over Nongshim, but certainly with their win over them and their 2-0 start, they are going to earn that number 6 spot back, and Nongshim will go back down to number 7. Despite their big win over Hanwha Life, it felt like that was more HLE playing poor than it was Nongshim playing great, although Kingen looks fantastic at the start of the split, and hopefully you can get some good stuff out of the players coming back from the LPL. Bottom is going to change as well. The bottom 3 teams, DRX is going to move all the way up to number 8 from number 10. I don't think they're the worst team in the league. Yes, they're one of the 0 and 2 teams, but they certainly looked a lot better than the other 0 and 2 teams in that series against T1. I think they're utilizing some of the changes a little bit better, and Willer being in here as the starting jungler just does change my opinion of what this team can accomplish. So for now, I think they're top 8. And then DNS moves down to 9. Bro moves down to 10. Just kind of feels fair with the way that they ended up playing. Bro was awful this week. They, right now, to me, are the worst team in the league, but DN SOOPers are very much on their tail with what they showed, I should say, in week number 1. Let me know what you agree with or disagree with in terms of these rankings down in the comment section below. You guys know I'm always curious to know what you agree and disagree with, so please let me know. But it's time to move on to my player of the week and my dud of the week for week number 1. And I can't believe I'm saying it either, but player of the week for week number 1 in the LCK Cup is Vikla, the mid laner for BNK FearX. Very cool to see him be the one to kind of break through at the start of the year and be the player of the week. Nongshim, bro, not exactly the hardest of opponents. BFX will obviously have a much more difficult schedule ahead of them with Gen.G and T1 still on the docket for the regular season, but at least for now, Vikla looked as good as you could look in the small sample size, and I do think he was the best performing player in the LCK in week number 1. My honorable mentions, Showmaker, the mid laner for Dplus KIA. Both him and Lucid were excellent, but Showmaker certainly was the driving force. If you wanted to give him player of the week, I'm certainly not going to argue you all that much. And then I have Owner here, the jungler for T1. I think you could theoretically put Doran here as well, but I think Owner was the best performing member of T1 in week 1, and I wanted to give a T1 rep some love in the honorable mention segment. Ironically enough, no Gen.G member, despite probably being the best team in the league in terms of performance in week number 1. It was more of a team effort, and so I didn't feel like I could single a single player out more than I could on these 3. So Showmaker and Owner are my honorable mentions, and then my dud of the week was very easy for me. It's going to Life, the support for DN SOOPers. What are they doing, man? Where is Peter? Why is Life playing at all? I just don't want to see this anymore. This team is going to have an incredibly low floor with Doctum and Life as their bot lane duo, and does not feel like they are ever going to accomplish their own goals if that is going to be the case. That's despite the fact that I think Pioshik played better than he had in a while this week. Closer looked fine. I think Dudu looked really good in their first series. None of that matters if this bot lane is going to be as bad as they were in week number 1, so pretty easy choice for Dead of the Week for me. It's going to Life, and Player of the Week is going to Vikla, but that's going to do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. It lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. Like I said, we're going to be covering this, league every single week on the channel, as we always do here, but we've got some other videos right around the corner. The LPL Week 1 recap was yesterday. That went live. The LEC Week 1 recap for LEC Versus is going live tomorrow, and then the LCS Primer is just around the corner because their split starts a week later than everybody else. So a lot of action coming up. We're covering all of those leagues weekly on this channel. If you were interested in a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL Esports, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all